Hello and welcome to another lecture of Audit at Fingertips program. Today we are going to talk about such important topic as risk control metrics, and we will also take a deep dive into the testing programs, how to create good testing programs that will ensure that will cover all risk scenarios. We will go over the topics of what the risk control matrix is. We will review examples, necessary elements, its life cycle, and then we will proceed to application of the draft principle to creation of testing programs. Let's start from the beginning, from the risk control matrix, or as we call it often, RCM. And I would like to refer to the audit mission, so what we are doing and for what. I want to remind that audit mission is not about the issues. Audit issue is about giving assurance. And assurance is an audit opinion which we give about the effectiveness of the control environment, its ability to mitigate the risks. And this is what we do during the audit. We review the processes, we review the controls, we review the evidence, and finally we end up with an opinion. However, how do we deliver this in terms of the papers, in terms of the artifacts? And we have a lot of different documents which are created, reviewed, approved during the audit, and we will review them in details in further lectures. However, today we will focus on the core of audit administration, the main document which lies in the middle of everything. It's not the ultimate document, it's not the final document as audit report. However, it's very useful for auditors because if you want to understand what was reviewed and what was covered and what were the audit testing results, assessment results, you can take just one document. This is risk control metrics. Of course, your methodology may name it differently and it may have a bit different structure. However, in general, it's the place where we have all important information about the scope collected. Okay, so as you may see, the RCM obtains inputs from various sources, and it centralizes this information. Walkthroughs, business monitoring documentation, previous audit results, previous audit files, assessment of control design, operating effectiveness testing of the controls, and assignments. All of that, all the sources feed information into the RCM, and RCM keeps it in one place. A bit of the right side, business monitoring documentation. Business monitoring documentation is the product of regular audit activity. It might be quarterly, it might be annually, depending on the methodology. However, this is a good practice for the auditors to, from time to time, to go the auditees outside of the audit cycle and just to check what were the changes for the past period. Why we need this? We need this to understand if some changes may lead to the situation when the level of the risk of auditable entity increased. And in that case, we need to revise the audit cycle. Probably we need to do audits more often. However, we'll speak about business monitoring practices in further lectures. So walkthroughs, those the walkthrough sessions which we performed during the planning. Previous audit files, of course, this is the past audits, last probably 2-3 years ago. And the bottom three boxes at the bottom, this is the ongoing audit activities like assessment of the control design with the results the same with OAT and assignments. That means that which auditors assigned for which control testing. Now, the RCM, how does it look like and what it consists of? Of course, this set of the fields, set of the columns might be different, and again, it depends on your methodology, and of course the form itself might be different. So here you see the most primitive form, the most basic form. This is Excel spreadsheets. However, you may have those RCMs in your audit management application. In that case, of course, it will have the different form. However, the basis will remain the same. And in this lecture encompasses the minimal set of the fields which is required to document the scope and the results. And these are processes, risks, controls and the owners, assigned auditors, assessment results, testing programs, and exceptions. Why it's important? Because it goes the logical sequence of scope definition. First, we understand what are the processes in scope, what actually our partners, so what the teams are doing. Because unless we know what the processes are, we cannot conclude what are the pertained risks. Then once we identify processes, we are identifying risks using our audit expertise and industry expertise. Once we identify the risks, we identify controls. And this is, by the way, those three items, the most important, well, plus control owner, this is something we receive mostly from the walkthroughs. When we end walkthroughs, we normally receive around 90% of this information. So, and for the controls, it could be kind of, we might find the control, but if there might be the situation when we don't find controls. In that case, we have a gap. Auditors assigned, it's the name of the auditor who is covering that control, doing design assessment effectiveness and operating effectiveness testing. And on the right side, starting from DA conclusion, this is something we start producing after the walkthroughs are done. DEA means we assess the design using our draft or any other methodology. Draft is very useful. Detect, respond, alert, fix, and track. Then once DEA is done, we need to move to the field work to operating effectiveness testing. In that case, we need the testing program, which is a bit different than DEA. And if we find any exceptions, we also need to put them here because the conclusion, so it's if conclusion is ineffective, we need to explain why. Also you may find useful to include additional attributes to your RCM. It could be control objectives, risk and control IDs, internal for the audit, or as well as if your company has risk and control management application, there could be company-wide identifiers. Control frequency, that why I didn't include it into the RCM, because control frequency is normally included into the DEA papers. However, you can include it here as well. Sampling, the control type, is it preventative or detective, or could be in some methodologies directive, whether it's manual or automated control. And you also can add reference to the evidence use, etc. Everything which you might useful, because it's not about one size fits all. It's about the what information you require to let your reader to easily understand what you've done during the audit. Now, RCM, as any other document in the audit, is any other process or sub-process. It has its own life cycle. You remember we start from the walkthroughs, and during the walkthroughs we identify processes and record them to the RCM. Then we identify risks related to those processes when we put them into the RCM, and we identify controls or gaps for those risks that put them into RCM. Now, next step, very important, the first amber box, is about to confirm what you wrote with your auditees, with your partners. Why it's important? Because before that point, this is your interpretation of the controls. However, the controls is something that is being done by the teams you're auditing. In that case, you need to confirm the fact, your interpretation, that your controls you recorded, they're accurate, those descriptions. Because if you misinterpret something, you start assessing it, you start testing it, in that case you may do something which is not really relevant, which contradicts the reality, and you'll need to redo your work. And once you receive this confirmation, you can proceed. Next box, also important, you need to get your audit owner's approval, or whatever role in your methodology is named. Why it's important? Because again, we are embarking on the assessment and testing, and we need to make sure we didn't miss any requirements from the audit manager. And then the further steps, they're aligned with the audit process. First, we do design effectiveness assessment, which is documented, of course, in a separate paper. However, we write down the results to our RCM. Then we proceed to the field work with the testing programs, which, well, testing programs normally it's nice to create them in the end of the planning, to proceed to AT fully prepared. Then you run those testing programs, you get the test results. Of course, again, you document testing results outside of RCM in separate papers. However, you include the conclusions into your RCM. Of course, if you're using an application to manage your audits, in that case, all this information will be pulled into RCM automatically from the papers, which are also being input into your application to your audit database. And that's it. Once we finish the testing, we document exceptions, if any, we close the RCM. Pretty simple, very simple. The only two main boxes are very important, they're very critical. Because they may prevent a lot of unnecessary work to be done. There's confirmation with auditees and audit owner's approval. Okay, so this is an example of a populated RCM. Those examples are absolutely fictional. They don't have any connection with the real examples, but however, they're quite realistic. So you may see here that three controls which we have from different areas, just to be more representative: vendor onboarding, user access management, and payment processing. You see, we write the processes first, then the risks associated with those processes, and remember, you may have more than one risk for one process. Then control. Again, you may have more than one control for a risk, depending how your risks are written. If your risks are more generic, in that case, it's absolutely normal to have more than one control. It's not because control has insufficient coverage, and just because it's more about documentation, control relevance. If you have your risks very specific, with specific teams, systems, specific documentation, it's likely you have one-one relationship. Auditor assigned, as we discussed, the control owner. It's important because the control owner would be the person you will come with all questions related to the control. And DA conclusion, it might be very short, it might just effective and ineffective, or you may put here some additional wording explaining why you consider that effective. And testing program. Now I tried to simplify the examples here, just because the presentation deck doesn't provide enough space for quick overlook. Probably you may find that more detailed test steps are more feasible because it's easier to go baby steps 1, 2, 3. But those examples are more for conveying the flavor. And for instance, if we see the DEA conclusion about the vendor reviews and approvals, about how the process of approval is designed. So when those approvals are placed, who is placing those approvals, where they are documented, etc. But then in the testing program, we are checking the past data, we're checking the current system capabilities, and this is different from DEA. And if we don't have any exceptions, we both conclude DA conclusion or ET conclusion, both will be effective, and no exceptions noted. However, if we have exceptions, like in the second example, where in this example we found that the evidence is not required. Remember, the where question, where it's documented, or the draft T, which stays for track. If the evidence is not sufficient to track the control, it means control, we cannot prove the control exists. And here we identify the design flow because the evidence rotation is not mandatory. So we are lucky if we get it, but there is no system, there is no requirement to store the evidence. And also in addition to that, during the impact assessment, we found that some access was not revoked, some evidence was not available. And here we write an exception that evidence is not always retained, and we found that 2 of 15 leavers, people who live in the firm and we need to revoke their access, the access was not removed even on the next day. And this is an example of the DEA failure. And of course, the remediation plan is needed, but this is the story to be told later, and this is information to be included in the report. Normally, we do not include issues in RCM, although if you think that it's helpful for your process, why not? And the last example is about the OET failure. So we see that DEA is effective, so the control is effectively designed. However, it's not properly executed, so the checkers, they review the payments, but they miss the incorrect information, like the sums are not always correct, so we're paying less than expected. As you see here on the right, sum is 10, 20, oh sorry, we're paying more than we needed, so we spent additional $2,000. And account numbers are not always correct. Because customer may have more than one account number. In that case, they can just select the wrong account number. And of course, an action plan is needed. And now here is below is the mapping. Just referring us back to the life cycle. So you see that the columns from B to F are populated during planning of walkthroughs. G and H, well, H could be like in the middle between fieldwork and planning. It's nice, again, it's nice to create testing programs during the planning after we finish DA. So G and H normally, it's again planning phase, but not the walkthroughs, but design effectiveness assessment phase. And I is OET, and of course exceptions are populated both in planning and fieldwork where we find them. So this is RCM, this is risk control matrix. This is how it's managed, this is how it looks like, this is how it's created, and this is its role. It's a single place where you can find all hands-on information about the audit and the work done. And if more details are needed, a reader may take the next step and pull the DEA OAT papers to understand what exactly was tested, reviewed, and reperform the audit work if needed. All right, moving to the testing deep dive. Testing programs, it's not always an easy task to do. And on this lecture, we will break down this approach, break down this problem, and to see how can we approach it systemically. Okay, so everything starts with the control wording, of course, and we need to end up with OET. But between this, so how to get from control to OET results, we need to create testing programs. But testing programs, that's nothing that goes without saying. Sometimes testing program is a challenge, and we have a helper here. The helper is the box which is called risk scenarios. So we will go over the practices, how to identify risk scenarios and how to create testing programs for each risk scenario. But before we go into that, there is a rule of thumb. You should test only run only the programs that may, in theory, but doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily, may end up with an issue. Because if you cannot, there is no option you can raise an issue from something, meaning it's just the logic of the test. The test is created the way it couldn't lead to an issue under any circumstances, you must not test it, because in that case, the best you can do is just to prove that control works well, but you cannot prove that control doesn't work well. And here is the 3 examples. So for instance, wrong test. Show me any 3 monthly reports. What does it mean? This test can only demonstrate that monthly reports are prepared. And if there were 3 monthly reports been shown to you, you can, okay, fine, you can say, okay, fine, there are 3 reports, but you cannot raise an issue from that, because you cannot identify the cases where there was no report. In that case, the right request would be show monthly reports for specific months, because if the sampling size, of course, it should match with your methodology. In that case, if something is not done in June, August, or December, you will notice that and you will be raise an issue from that. Another example, show me any data validation error emails. Again, you cannot raise an issue from that, because so this request is about the consequence of the control that occurred, but it wouldn't help you to identify the cases where control didn't occur. So the right way to verify this is to show me a demo that the application is sending emails. In that case, you can verify that control is working, and it can send the emails. In addition to that, you can review the past data, ask for emails for a sample of the errors. You can verify when the control was implemented, but more on that to come. And the last one, show me the control exceptions that control worked in the past. Again, for instance, if we're speaking about data control which leaves a log, in that case, the log will only prove that control was working, but it cannot demonstrate that control was not working. In that case, you can, instead of asking for the log, you can ask for the evidence that control was implemented at the date, plus, of course, all further relevant documentation for the changes made to the control. So you get the idea. And here how the scenarios breakdown works for some control examples. So you see, as you see, we have 3 columns here. First is the draft component, draft risk scenario. So remember, detect, respond, alert, fix, and track. And we go one by one, trying to understand what may go wrong. And of course, it might be very helpful if you maybe break down your processes, really baby steps, very atomized, just yes or no. It could work, it doesn't work, then move into the next step, like you see on the screen. Okay, so first, detect. So you see detect, we have 4 detect components. Now, detection should work for, so we are here, we have an example, procurement and compliance team review all new vendors, and they not just review them, they must review in accordance with guidelines. They need to check specific items from the guidelines, and this should happen before the new vendors are activated in the system. So let's start with detection. Okay, we start asking the question. So the detection means that procurement and compliance detect deviations during their reviews. Okay, first question is, what if the new vendor will not be subject to review at all? It will bypass the review. So what can we do? And we reply with a test. Show us that the system won't allow to do this. Okay, next question is, again, detection. We still have more to cover with the detection. Okay. We see that we got a demo, and we see that control is working. However, remember, the audit period is not just the current moment. It might be like 12 months. In that case, how can we verify that control worked in the past? Maybe control didn't work in the past. Well, in that case, we can take a sample of the existing vendors, review the past data, and verify that there are records that they passed those they got those approvals. And remember, we are not questioning for the ability of the control. So this is OET. We agreed that the controls are designed correctly. Now, next question to the detection. Okay, the reviews are done, and they were done in the past. However, it's still a bit of a suspicion. How do we know that those person who did the review, they did it well? Because it's the manual control. It's application of personal expertise. How do we know it's well? Well, we have the guidelines, and we can check whether all the items from the guidelines are verified, or if there is no report on the detailed review. In that case, we can check details of our vendors and just see if and reperform this review, reperform this check. Okay, so next, again, detection. Review is done, and the review is done correctly in accordance with the guidelines, and the reviews were done in the past. But how do we know that the right reviewer was doing the review? So we can just take the list of reviewers and see if they are from procurement and compliance team, and they are not makers. All the checkers, all the reviewers are not the same as makers to ensure separation of duty. Okay, next, well, now we've done with detection. Maybe you may come up with more question on that, but you got the idea. So for any step of the control, for every main step, we're trying to challenge it, trying to see what may go wrong. And again, it's important, the questions should be worded the way that they are able to capture the issues. Respond, meaning respond, what's the first reaction of the control? Here we don't need to, so here it's the rejection in our case. However, we have already covered rejection at the detection demo, so we don't need to test it twice. Alert and fix. Alerting is not really important because actually the person who is doing the review doesn't need an alert. And fix, you should cover fix. However, for the control, it's not really important because first, there might be no fix just because the vendor doesn't match the requirements. And the risk is not that we don't onboard the member. The risk is we would onboard the vendor which doesn't match our requirements. And if there is no fix, meaning nothing has changed and the vendor was not resubmitted, that's still okay. That will not allow risk to materialize. And the track component, of course, is always track component. Very important. It means that what if everything is done, but the evidence of that is not retained or is not retained in full? Well, it's easy to test because we can see in the demo that our records are created immediately, and we can verify data for the past periods. So you see how we did this. We took very simple, just 5 components, we took each of them and tried to challenge it. Just think about how would you hack it? How would you undermine each of the components, try to circumvent it, and ask the question from that idea. Try to find the way to bypass the control. Another example, it's the data validation. I gave 4 examples in this lecture because those examples, they are from different types of the controls, different designs. So you may see in which cases which components might not be applicable or might not be important or relevant. Okay, so this is technology data validation controls. System X is sending information to system Y, and system Y validates the received payload against list of predefined rules. And if the rules if the rules are not verified, the validation fails. In that case, the system Y would reject it and notify the support team because someone needs to pay attention because transmission has failed. And again, we start from the detection. Okay, so first and most straightforward, the system designed to detect errors doesn't detect errors. We can have a demo on that. Okay, the system is able to detect the errors, but the rules are incorrect. So configuration of the system is correct. They are not sufficient. They are not exhaustive. They are not relevant. So here is you need to apply your expertise in this area. Maybe engage your subject matter experts from business or from technology, depending on which team you are in, and just ask them, so is this sufficient, or probably we need to validate something else. Okay, fine, rules are sufficient, system detects errors, but the rules are not implemented. And because we may see the rules in business requirements, but not in the system. Well, in that case, we can just take business requirements, we take the system configuration and reconcile them. Done for the detection. Now responding. Responding in here is the system is just not allowing the incorrect data to pass, to be ingested. In the case we may have a demo which will show that the system rejects incorrect data. And of course, all the demo related questions might be merged, well, and should be merged into a single demo. You shouldn't have separate demos for small questions. Try to merge it into a single testing program. Alerting. Alerting is very important here because the control works in the backend. It's automated, and if alert doesn't reach the person who can fix it, the control wouldn't mitigate the risk. So alerting. First, what if the system is able to detect the errors, but it doesn't notify the support team? Okay, we may see during the demo that the system is sending out the emails. You don't necessarily need to send them to the support team. It might be any test distribution list, but we need to verify that the system is doing that. What if alerts are sent but too late? So the unacceptable period of time passes between the issue and the alert dispatched. It still could be possible because the system may send them in batches, for instance, once an hour or once a day. Well, in that case, we can check see the demo and see that the system is sending them immediately or in accordance with particular schedule. In that case, we also can review production configurations. Another alert question: the system sends the alert on time, but not to the right people. You need to review the distribution list to verify that the right people are the recipients of those alerts. Fixed step, that's very important because we need to ensure that the system not only rejected the payload, but also someone came and fixed it and the message finally achieved the system Y and recorded its database. And for instance, our management reporting is not impacted. Well, in that case, what we can do, we can just take the incident log or those validation log, make a sample of the exceptions, and ask for the email evidence if it's available. And of course, track it through the incident management process to verify that the issues were remediated and root cause was addressed. And last two, track. Both relate to track. So for instance, system is capable to do all of that, but is not recording events to the log. Or in that case, of course, we can review it in the demo. However, the last question is more challenging. So we know, and refers to the very first example, what if the control is working right now, but it didn't work back in the days? Well, we cannot use the log to review that because the log will show us only the time when control worked, and it will not show us the time when control didn't work. In that case, we need to review the project documentation to see where the control was implemented and what were the changes over the time, and see if it's sufficient to prove that control was working during the audited period. Another example is about inventory check, is about counting the number of laptops. So you see, I'm trying to give approval example, technology example, now counting example. And you see the structure of the draft components is different every time. Okay, so now detect. And the control, by the way, is monthly. An employee is checking the laptops, check their numbers, reconcile their IDs against the inventory, and submits the reconciliation report to the IT director, who is the owner of those assets, and all missed assets should be investigated. So detection, 2 points about the detection. First of all, whether control performed at all or not, and whether it's performed, on time, all the time, well, at least for a sample, right? So you take the sample of reconciliation reports, you take a sample of months and you review reconciliation report for those months. Or probably the counting is done on time. However, it's not done properly. For instance, you've got the records that the laptop in place while it's not, just because it wasn't verified with the person's eyes. In that case, we need to make a sample of laptops and verify their presence. Respond, we don't need to do anything here because it's manual detective control. It's because it happens after risk may materialize. We cannot do anything to prevent the risk, so this is not applicable here. However, alerting is very important. Because what could happen, the reconciliations are done, but the reports are not submitted to the accountable person. And in that case, we need to verify, see the evidence that the reports were sent, for instance, emails. And the second issue might be the reports are sent, but the owner does not review them. In that case, we need to verify that they were approved by the owner. Now, fixing, we have two components for fixing here. The escalation might be done properly, however, nobody is taking action. For instance, the owner doesn't address reconciliation findings. So in that case, we need to take the missed assets and see what was done to remediate them, and it relates us immediately to the next question, whether the actions taken are sufficient or not. And here you need to apply your personal opinion, your expertise, to assess whether all necessary was done to find out where the assets are, and if they couldn't be recovered, was their investigation done, for instance, by the security team. And the last one, again, track. What if we don't have evidence? What if we don't have those counting sheets? What if we don't have those reports, etc.? No evidence, no control. And the last example about access data restriction. In that case, we want to make sure that only authorized users can export personal data. And all the attempts are logged and reviewed on a weekly basis. Again, starting from the detection component. So first question is, what if the X attempts are not detected? Well, some unauthorized user is trying to access, however, the system doesn't detect it. It just doesn't do anything. In that case, we can ask for a demo. Show us that it works. Second, the next step is about those weekly reviews. Someone should do them. But whether the responsible team is really doing that, they should leave a trail, they should leave reports of those reviews, because if there is nothing left, how do we know that reviews are done? And again, I want to reiterate that idea that those reports, those evidence, they are not for the audit, they are for the managers who own the risk. Because if auditors cannot verify whether control was done or not, the same is for the managers. Management won't be able to verify whether the controls to mitigate the risks in their area of accountability, whether those controls are properly executed. So the trail of those reviews should be in place. Now, next step is weekly reviews are done, but whether they were done properly. In that case, what we can do, we can make a sample of unauthorized attempts and verify that they are in those review reports. Now, respond. Respond here is the ability of the system to reject unauthorized access. Meaning, if wouldn't system allow me to get access to data? It can detect, it can record my access, and the weekly reviews could be done, but does the system really prevent me from access? Well, in that case, again, a demo that will show us the problem. Alerting. The control design doesn't require immediate alerting, and the control reviews are done manually, so we don't need alerting here. Fix. Well, for alerting, it could be also, depends on the context, depends on the control wording practice. We may also consider alerting that a reviewer is sending information about identified issues to, for instance, to the security team. Fix. Now, actions. What's being done to address the issue? Of course, we may not expect that each and every single attempt must be investigated. Probably just people forgot their password and just tried the wrong password. However, if there is something systemic, definitely some actions should be taken and root causes should be remediated. And of course, if this is external threat, probably some additional controls around access should be implemented. And of course, tracking. The system should maintain the logs. The system should allow reviewers to access those logs, and reviewers should leave the evidence of those reviews, and we also need to see how those issues were investigated. So that's everything. That's everything about the risk scenarios identification and developing a scope for the testing. Just a quick recap. So what we covered today? The RCM. The RCM is the heart of the audit file. It contains processes, risks, controls. It contains design assessments. It contains testing programs. It contains OAT results, effective or ineffective. It contains exceptions, wordings. And remember, you need to run your RCM through the life cycle. It needs to be vetted by your auditees, audit teams, to make sure that you're auditing the right controls. It should be approved by the audit owner, and it should be populated with all audit results. And of course, risk scenarios: draft approach, detect, respond, alert, fix, and track. All those components should be considered during development of the testing program. Do not test something from which you may not potentially raise an issue. It doesn't mean you shouldn't audit the areas where everything is fine, the controls work well. It means you shouldn't run the programs which will not lead to an issue under any circumstances. So you need to draft your testing programs carefully to make sure that they will be able to identify potential issues. And once you finish your review of your components, you will end up with the testing program. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. I hope this information is useful for you. And next time we'll start a big topic, which I think we will split into multiple lectures, which is called Audit Lifecycle. Thank you. See you next time. Bye-bye.